House Speaker Mike Johnson is a victim of anti-Christianism. Every U.S. citizen has the right to participate in government, regardless of religion. Since being elected the 56th Speaker of the House on October 25, Representative Mike Johnson of Louisiana has endured an unprecedented level of religious persecution and bigotry, with opponents basically accusing him of advocating that America become a theocracy. Calling Mr. Johnson a Christian fundamentalist, former White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki declared, "The Bible doesn't just inform his worldview. It is his worldview." Other media outlets have called him the new face of Christofascism and a Christian nationalist. Other charges are too vile to print. It's true that Mr. Johnson claims to be a devout believer in Jesus Christ and a strong and patriotic defender of his country, but that doesn't make him a religious nationalist, that is, someone who fuses his love of God with his country in idolatrous fashion. The great irony unfolding in the national conversation is that just as most people rightly condemn the anti-Semitism raging on college campuses and elsewhere, an abiding anti-Christianism is going mainstream with a rise in attacks on the new Speaker of the House. In recent days, Mr. Johnson's judgment and ability to lead the country have been questioned because he holds to foundational Christian beliefs that are thousands of years old, specifically, the sanctity of marriage, respect for human life, and the supremacy and exercise of religious freedom. That the Speaker knelt with colleagues to pray on the House floor became ripe for mockery. In other words, because Mr. Johnson espouses strong convictions on positions that millions of Americans profess today, he is somehow suspect and unqualified to wield the gavel. Article 6 of the Constitution specifies that no religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust under the United States. The Founding Fathers deliberately worked overtime to avoid what many of them had fled from overseas when government officials in Britain were required by law to take communion in the Church of England. Yet not requiring that a member hold to specific religious doctrines doesn't mean they can't, and historically, nearly all have done so. The religious composition of the 118th Congress is instructive. Of those who responded, 303 members identify as Protestants, 148 are Catholic, 33 are Jewish, 9 are Mormon, 8 are Orthodox Christian, and 33 are either Buddhist, Muslim, humanist or some other subgroup, or are not religious at all. On the other side of the U.S. Capitol, Senate Majority Leader Charles E. Schumer has wielded the gavel since 2021 and has been a member since 1999. A New York native, Mr. Schumer is listed as a staff member at Central Synagogue on Lexington Avenue at East 55th Street in Manhattan. He faithfully champions legislation and policies favorable to the Jewish people. Has anyone ever accused him of leading a religious campaign? Of course not. The faith of elected officials is commendable, and it shapes them. But the vocation of politics requires a person to swear an oath to the Constitution. Mr. Johnson has been advocating an America governed not by the Bible, but by the Constitution, which gives every U.S. citizen the right to participate in government regardless of their religion. By God's favor and the wisdom of our Founding Fathers, Americans of all faiths, and no faith, are entitled to a voice in the public square. It's my hope and prayer that as anti-Christian sentiment grows and antagonists become more aggressive in their actions in the coming days, that Christian leaders like Mike Johnson will not be bullied, but instead freely exercise their rights as citizens and do so as Jesus modeled, full of grace and truth. House Speaker Mike Johnson is a victim of anti-Christianism. Every U.S. citizen has the right to participate in government, regardless of religion. Since being elected the 56th Speaker of the House on October 25, Representative Mike Johnson of Louisiana has endured an unprecedented level of religious persecution and bigotry, with opponents basically accusing him of advocating that America become a theocracy. Calling Mr. I am a pediatrician in Gaza. Please save US from this horror. At Kamal Adwan Hospital in northern Gaza, we are no strangers to treating victims of airstrikes over the years. The team all too often must rush into the emergency room, all hands on deck, ready to treat shrapnel wounds, burns and blood loss. In the early days of the current Israel-Hamas conflict, our hospital of only 80 beds was quickly overrun. On October 17, following the explosion at Al-Ali Arab Hospital in Gaza City, we were flooded with dozens of wounded and dying victims. By the next day, our patient roster had grown by nearly 120. We knew it would be another sleepless night, another in a string of far too many since the violence started 10 days earlier. As many as 3 to 4 children had to share single beds, and many more were forced to settle for the floors. Some patients from the hospital explosion came in screaming in pain, but others were silent, in shock or beyond saving. With anesthesia, iodine, alcohol, blood and even gauze running low or entirely gone, we had a dwindling supply of tools to help ease the human suffering. The people who flocked to Kamal Adwan to sleep in our hallways or even the parking lot, believing it safer than their homes, were no doubt as frightened as we were. As I write this, the hospital is on the precipice of true disaster. We are down to the last gallons of fuel necessary to run the electric generators, despite our most stringent efforts to ration it since the start of hostilities. Lights are off most of the time, elevators are out and patients are carried between floors. When the fuel runs out, we will no longer be able to function at night after the sun goes down. Most of the tools and equipment needed to run a modern hospital like ventilators, defibrillators, and our neonatal units will become useless. When the generators fall silent, we will be relegated to practicing medieval-level medicine. Without an urgent resupply of fuel, the lights will go out permanently, and our hospital could turn into a morgue. Kamal Adwan is far from the only hospital reaching its breaking point, as doctors like myself desperately cry out for more aid to Gaza. I'm a pediatrician at Kamal Adwan, part of a team of 9 MedGlobal doctors and humanitarian aid workers that have been on the ground in Gaza since 2018. In that time we've seen our share of tragedy, suffering and shortage, but nothing could have prepared us for the horrors of the past few weeks. My team and I have divided our time between caring for patients and locally sourcing and distributing medical supplies, food and fuel to 11 different hospitals, $1.3 million worth of resources since the violence began. And it is still not nearly enough. Most of us have chosen to remain in northern Gaza, defying the evacuation orders because we're unwilling to leave behind our patients, for many of whom evacuation would mean certain death. Abandoning them now would be a violation of my Hippocratic oath as well as basic human decency. My wife and 6 children have also stayed at the hospital with me since the violence began. I've tried to convince them to head south, but my wife told me that we will either live or die together. Many Palestinians in North Gaza feel the same, risking their lives at home rather than face the prospect of becoming refugees in the south. Doctors are no strangers to tragedy or death and are trained to steel themselves against it, but the pressure we've been under these past few weeks is beyond any training. One of my colleagues lost his father and brother to an airstrike in the first week of the fighting, another saw his dead son wheeled in by an emergency crew. At a professional level, a personal level and most fundamentally a human level, the people of Gaza and the medics who care for them are at a breaking point. Like our patients, especially the children, this conflict will leave every one of us traumatized. Even so, we are treating our patients to the best of our ability with the bare minimum of electricity, medicine and supplies. We sterilize wounds with vinegar, previously unthinkable in our modern intensive care unit. Drinking water ran out days ago, and the water we do have isn't potable, contributing to a rising tide of intestinal infections and diseases not seen in Gaza in years. Our morgue filled to capacity within the first week and we've had to store many dead children in a nearby tent, praying that the decomposing bodies don't contaminate the water wells or spread further disease. We fear an outbreak of cholera and typhoid. We fear for the